You can call me stupid. Listen, you can call me sheep. You think that using her would get to me. And if you're right, then you're in trouble deep. 'Cause I won't break, no, I know I won't wait.
All right, we're back online here with the Florida Watchmen, and we're just a group of guys getting together and talking about, really more specifically, is what we're focused on is the abolition of abortion. We will be discussing other matters, but our main focus is this plight in our land called abortion that has gone on for 47 years plus. We're at 61 million plus babies have been murdered. Over 3,500 every day in America are murdered and butchered. So what is the Florida Watchman? We've said that before. We based off Ezekiel chapter 33. We are that watchman that God has commanded us to go and to warn a nation or nations of sins that are committed toward God. The shedding of innocent blood. And so we do it not as in just because we don't like those people or we hate these people or whatever. We do it out of love and compassion for our God and also for them, to warn them of the judgment of God that's coming, and which I believe is already here. And so when God says we do that, we must. And also when judgment does come, we won't be responsible for that blood upon our hands. But if we say, well, I don't really care, I'm just gonna live my life, my little Christian life that I have personally confessed and repented of, that I have been doing for about 30 years, being faithful to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, but to actually love the Lord God with all my heart, soul, and strength, and to love my neighbor as myself. I have failed in that and repent every day of that, and I don't want to go back toward that. I want to see those who are being oppressed in the land and to take that battle, take that fight, and to be that man that God has commanded us to be. And that's to relieve that oppression, whether it be Proverbs 24, Proverbs 31, speaking up for those who can't speak, those who are being carried away to death. So today we are having a privilege of having Bradley Pierce, and I'll let Bradley tell more. Yeah, introduce, but we're having him today, and I kind of consider him the guru of really just far as the legal aspect, and really how he has opened my eyes of being a Republican my entire life, voting Republican, conservative, and really not realizing there's actually the Republican Party who has really given us Roe and also has perpetuated that, has kept it going. And so when he talks to us about this, he's going to explain that clearly of why that's so, and then why we need to stop taking part in that lie of whether it be we need to elect another president or we need to elect some more better members on SCOTUS, the Supreme Court Justice, the more better conservative judges to overturn Roe. And why the point is not to overturn it because it's not constitutional, but really to ignore it. So
Mr. Pierce, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Bradley Pierce, and the most important thing about me is I'm a Christian, saved by grace, by the grace of God. I'm a husband and father, and I'm also an attorney. That kind of comes down the list as far as importance for me, but I've been practicing for about 13 years now, and I've always been a Republican. I've always been pro-life. I was raised in a Christian home, and always, loved unborn children and hated the evil of abortion in our land. And but now I am an abolitionist, and I do a lot of work drafting abolition legislation around the country to abolish abortion, as well as help to lead Abolish Abortion Texas, an organization in Texas that's seeking to end abortion in our state.
And what is the website to that?
It's abolishabortiontx.org.
Awesome. How come you didn't choose to go another route? Like, why didn't you choose sex trafficking or any other issue that we have here in America?
Well,
or what led you to?
Yeah, so God, I would say that. That's the easy answer. God calls different people to different things, and we all need to be fighting and crying out against the evil and sin in our land and lifting high the name of Christ and lifting high his law and calling people to repentance where we fall so short of it. And thankfully, there's not just there's a way for us to be free of our sin that we've committed. And so as far as sex trafficking, there's a lot of great people that, are involved with helping to fight against that. I feel a particular call to the issue of abortion because it's something that's legal.
Yeah.
So-called legal in our land, whereas obviously sex trafficking is not. Now, there may be ways to improve some of the laws regarding sex trafficking, but it's illegal to do sex trafficking. And so fighting for good legislation, I feel like abortion is one of the top areas. And it's also a tip of the iceberg, if you will, on a whole different issue that we see in our land. Actually, when I was a child, when I first decided that I wanted to be an attorney, I was 16 years old, and I actually wanted to be a Supreme Court justice. Okay, I wanted to be on the U.S. Supreme Court because I heard my parents my whole life, and a lot of Christian people I heard, and a lot of pastors and preachers talk about the problem in our land is that the Supreme Court is attacking Christianity. They've taken prayer out of schools. They've taken the Bible out of schools. They've given us Roe versus Wade. And even since that time, they've given us, so-called same-sex marriage and all sorts of other things. And so at that age, I thought, well, then that's where I want to go and be a U.S. Supreme Court justice. So that way I can then fix all those things. And so that's one reason why the issue of abortion is particularly important to me, because it is the pinnacle of the issue of judicial supremacy, the idea that it's the Supreme Court that makes the ultimate decisions about these issues. And the same thing that called me or that made me want to be a Supreme Court justice is the same reason that I'm actually now opposed to a lot of what the Supreme Court does, is because they have too much power.
Yeah.
And so the issue of abortion is important to me for lots of personal reasons. My wife and I, we love life. We have 7 children. We've had 2 miscarriages, and we have 9 children, including those. And every single one of those children are equally valuable before God. They're all made in the image of God. So there's lots of reasons why I'm particularly sensitive about this battle. But I think it's because this issue, this is the pinnacle of the issue when it comes to judicial supremacy and where we have concentrated power in this country.
Right. I'm so glad it's not about you hating women.
Absolutely not. The opposite. No, I love them.
Well, so you mentioned in quotes legal.
Yeah.
Concerning abortion. Why did you go like this? Well, hypothetically, the whole country assumes that it's legal.
Because
what's the reality about it?
Because that's the number one thing when we're speaking, whether it be at the mill or just at a Republican committee meeting or whatever it is that it's legal. We got to overturn it.
Right.
And so.
Yeah. So obviously, God is the lawmaker. God is the ultimate lawmaker. God has all authority in heaven and earth, and all authority in heaven and earth has been granted to Christ, and then he delegates that authority to whomsoever he pleases. Just like Pilate, he would not have any authority except to be given to him by God. So all authority comes from God, and so any authority that is contrary to God's law, or any man's law that's passed is contrary to God's law, is not law.
Right.
If there's a conflict between man's law and God's law trumps it every time. So that's one reason that I use quotes with saying legal, because abortion is clearly not inconsistent with God's law. It conflicts directly with it in numerous areas. And so it's not legal under that standard. But it's also not legal under even a man's law in this country, under the Constitution. And as far as man's law is concerned in this country, this U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Right. And even under it, Roe versus Wade is not a legitimate decision. It conflicts with the Constitution, And so therefore it's not the law of the land. It's not law at all. And so that's why abortion is not, as I use the quotes, legal in this country.
Right. I'm so glad you started with the foundation of God, because I would say this when it's been a couple of times I've spoken to two constitutional lawyers, both of them claiming to be believers, begin with a secular foundation. Yeah, but we from the pulpit you hear them saying God's law above man, but yet they're exercising pagan law above God.
He takes a back seat.
Right. So you're different. Are you just a general attorney? What kind of attorney are you?
So in some areas, I would say I'm a constitutional attorney. I practice constitutional law in several areas of my practice, including like Fourth Amendment law and First Amendment law. But I'm also a parental rights attorney. I do a lot of work with parental rights around the country. And then I do also just do general civil practice. I represent some nonprofits, some businesses, some political organizations, and do adoptions as well. And so, yeah, I kind of do a little bit of this and that as well.
That's awesome. So so now you mentioned that that it's unconstitutional. So we know biblically why. I think that for the most part, we all as Christians, if you ask every Christian, we will agree abortion is murder.
Right.
But when it comes to the Constitution, there's like, hold up. Christians be like,
Right.
That's up to SCOTUS.
Right.
Like, how would you persuade someone constitutionally that it's unconstitutional to have an abortion?
Yeah, well, and the way I would put it is that it's not necessarily unconstitutional to have an abortion, but it's unconstitutional for the Supreme Court to order states not to outlaw abortion. So the difference is that there's something called the police powers, and that is the power to police crimes, right? The power to arrest people, prosecute people, jail people for crimes. Well, that is a power that even the Supreme Court generally agrees is a state power, right? The Constitution itself is an express powers document, which means the federal government has the powers that are expressed in the Constitution, and whatever powers are not expressly given to the federal government in the Constitution are left to the states, because the Constitution is just who signed the Constitution, who created the Constitution. We the people through the states. Yeah. And so we the people through the states, we gave up some power to the federal government. But we didn't give up all power. We just gave up a limited amount of it. In fact, we explicitly said exactly what powers we're giving to the federal government. And if it doesn't say it, then they don't have it. And we even have the 10th Amendment, which says exactly that. All powers not delegated to the federal government by the Constitution are left to the states, respectively, and to the people. Are reserved to the states and to the people. And so is there anything in the Constitution that says that a woman has a right to an abortion? No. Is there anything in the Constitution that gives the Supreme Court the final word on, on that issue? Right. No, there's not. The Constitution says that it and laws made in pursuant of it are the supreme law of the land. Well, the issue of abortion is not in the Constitution, and the power to prohibit states from outlawing abortion is not in the Constitution. Right. So that's why Roe versus Wade is an unconstitutional decision.
Right. Awesome. I'm going to leave it to you. Or how about you, Cody? Do you have anything?
No, not right now.
Not right
Just
now.
kind of listening and forming ideas, maybe. Yeah.
So basically, get back to God, and before we get into more of the kind of the history of how we got Roe. He said God is the ultimate law, the highest law, which I think Blackstone says nature's law or divine law, natural law. They call it. Was he referring to God's law? But when I come across people, and I wish I had a conversation with a guy the other day on Facebook, and I say, well, God's law, our laws, man's laws in this land should mirror God's laws. And he's like, well, that sounds good maybe a couple 100 years ago or back in Bible time or whatever it was. He was kind of mocking that. That's not, because secular people or sinful people will act sinful. So the argument from the Bible or God's law, it really has no place in the secular scene.
Right.
And so that's why even when pro-life groups enter in, they want to leave it just to science or more of a human. This is wrong. Which my response is, why is it wrong? If there's no God, no Bible.
Right.
So is that a battle that you have with folks when you're practicing or you're doing legislation, like working on legislation?
Right.
As far as trying to, you have that. Well, that's God's law has really no play in this.
Certainly, there's some people that say that, but in some ways, God is the God of those who believe in Him, and He's the God of those who don't believe in Him. Right? He's God. So whether or not they agree with it, it still applies to them.
Yeah.
Whether they like His law or not, it still applies to them. Right. But really we win in every arena.
Right.
Whether we're talking about God's law or science or the Constitution, the true law of the land, all of them line up to say, abortion is wrong.
Yeah.
Abortion should be a crime. But obviously, the most important of those all is God's law, and that's the reason that the others reflect that.
Yes.
That's the reason science confirms God's law because He created science.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's certainly an issue, but it's one that God's law applies to everything.
Yes, I agree. And then really the main climax or the main topic of what we want to discuss is that when
should we kind of ask
Can I say one more thing on that last point? I'm reminded of whenever God in the Old Testament was giving His law to His people in Deuteronomy chapter 4 and in chapter 6, I believe. He then says that, I think it's Moses is saying this, and he says, what nation is there? The other nations are going to look at God's law that Israel is practicing, and they're going to say, what nation is there that has a law so just and righteous as this? And that's what, God's law is the law of liberty. God's law is the law of freedom. And the closer we get to God's law, the more free and prosperous and be able to pursue true happiness people will be.
Right.
So that's my view of it.
I would say that one of the things that I have a challenge with in my city of Jacksonville, which by the way, we're not in Florida. We happen to be where? Oklahoma.
We're in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, the capital of Oklahoma.
Right. And Bradley, can you give us a reason why we're here?
Yeah, we've all come here this week because there is
you're from Texas. You said.
Yeah, I'm from Texas. I'm from just north of Austin. And there is a bill here in Oklahoma, Senate Bill 13, carried by Senator Joseph Silk, that would, if passed and enforced, it would abolish abortion in the state of Oklahoma. It's the Abolition of Abortion in Oklahoma Act. And so we're all here to support that, to rally around that, to learn more about that, to disciple others. And so that's what's brought us all here together.
It's awesome.
Yeah. We're the citizens supporting the magistrates.
That's right.
So that's what we as believers need to do more of, which...
That's a very good point.
And going back to my statement here, like in Jacksonville, this is Jacksonville, Florida. We are so mixed with so much different theology, and it's poor theology. Just recently, I had a meeting with one of my city council members, and it only took 20 minutes. Most of the conversation I wasn't even given the chance to talk about the Constitution. It was the reason why I went to visit, to have an appointment with my city council member was concerning abolishing abortion in the form of, what is it called that we do the sanctuary city, right, for the preborn. And so I only spent 20 minutes with her. I didn't even get to the fact that it was unconstitutional. I didn't even address the fact that she is the lesser magistrate, supposed to be standing for every citizen.
Yeah.
She was professing to be a Christian and immediately believes that we're done away with the law.
Right.
And it was just new covenant. We're under grace.
Right.
And so she brought up the question, which it was a rabbit trail for me, which I should have been smarter enough to not go that trail.
Right.
But she was like, "Do you believe in capital punishment?" And when I told her what I believed, yes, she was like, it was like that's it. Our conversation ended. Her emotions like a wall, and it was like 20 minutes was nothing but about that conversation, and she wouldn't drop it.
Right.
Bottom line, she doesn't care less to criminalize abortion or to even make it illegal until they find a law to make men responsible. Like, what would you say to that, to somebody who says that? And let's just like a city council member or anybody.
Like men are responsible for what do you say?
For the abortion.
For the abortion, like being responsible for the child, rather than just leave it up to the mom.
Yeah. I've heard that from several people that they say, well, I'll support this whenever the men are also liable. And I say, then you're supporting it.
Yeah.
Because the men are. Today, even under existing law, if a man forces a woman to get an abortion, he can be prosecuted for murder in many states, maybe every state, if he forces a woman to do that. He can certainly be prosecuted for assault and things like that towards her. But in many states, he could actually be prosecuted even for the death of the child. So men are already responsible in that sense. Men are responsible for the children in other ways. We have child support laws in every state. But also under every bill of abolition that's introduced around the country, most of them, maybe all of them, they don't single anybody out. They don't single the woman out. They don't single the abortionist out. They don't single the man out or the woman's parents or boyfriend or whomever. Because when you go look at other laws against murder, they don't single anyone out either.
Yeah.
No one can murder, right? And anyone who murders is equally subject to the law. And that's what the bills of abolition do. All the bills of abolition do, we're not creating new law.
Yeah.
All we're saying is that, this law over here that applies to born people, and there's this exception for unborn people, we're just taking away the exception.
Yeah.
So now that law that applies to born people now applies to unborn people. And we're not singling out mothers. We're not singling out abortionists. We're not singling out the biological fathers. All of them are equally subject to the law. And under, abolition bills, fathers could also be prosecuted for their involvement with the abortion as well.
I really appreciate you being descriptive on that because, I tend to get into that habit of mentioning in social media that it's criminalize the moms, but I like it how you you make it more general, just criminalize it, but don't point fingers at somebody in particular. We understand the mom's the one who's going in, right?
So all their accomplices is what you're saying. Anybody who's involved in accomplishing that murder is what you're saying.
Anyone who is soliciting, encouraging, in a lot of states aiding and abetting,
driving them,
right? Who's participating willingly in the act of getting the abortion is all going to be equally subject to the law.
It's no different than a law that not to steal, and somebody goes in to steal a bank, and the person who drove that person going in to steal the bank also gets arrested.
Yeah.
But that's a good analogy or a good example, because the opposite is something that people say, well, what about the woman? What about a miscarriage? Or what about a woman who's forced into an abortion? Or what about a woman who really doesn't know what she's doing? Well, actually, the law already provides, and would provide under every abolition bill in the country, provides defenses in those cases. And those women would not be subject to prosecution or conviction. Just like the driver of the getaway car. If you're just driving with your friend and you pull up in front of a stop and go, and he runs inside and commits a robbery, well, you didn't know what he was going to do.
Right.
Or if he puts a gun to your head and makes you drive him there and forces you to do it, you're not a criminal if it's or if it's an accident, or if you didn't know what was going on, or if you were forced into it. The same thing, and then again, that applies. That's how the law already applies to everybody else, and it would also apply here to women who are forced into things or don't know what they're doing, or or it's an accident or miscarriage or things like that. They would not be subject to prosecution either.
That's awesome. What about the women who have had an abortion?
and they would also not be subject to prosecution because, it's called, retroactive laws, or prosecute people retroactively for abortions that have happened in the past. And those are not only unconstitutional in pretty much every state, but they're also unjust.
Yeah.
Our man's law, it has said for the last 47 years, this is okay and illegal. And for us then to turn around and say, no, we're just kidding, now you're going to go to jail, that would be wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
And that would be unjust. And so, certainly every abolition bill in the country only applies to things after the bill becomes effective.
Because you hear that little lies that are spread around sometimes. Oh, they're going to punish women that have had abortions in the past.
Right.
I hear that a lot.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, they were like, I can't go for this. Some people have said, well, if we're already disobeying the Constitution or not abiding by the Constitution, what makes you think that they're going to abide? They're not going to arrest all women. I was like, dude, America will be broke if we arrested every woman.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's a lot of prison time and a lot of taxes.
And the other thing people don't realize is that there's so many protections built into our justice system. It's not perfect, right? It's run by men and women who are not perfect.
But this is why we want righteous men to be involved.
Right. Yeah. But our justice system, the opportunity for a true, abuse to happen is very low. Right, you say, well, someone who, it was a accident or miscarriage or something like that, they could be prosecuted, and it could be. Listen, you have to have so many people conspiring together to do that. Yeah. You have to have almost unanimous among the people investigating, law enforcement arresting, prosecutors deciding whether to prosecute, the grand jury, because we're talking about felonies, deciding whether to indict, the judges, the juries, and then you normally have another jury or sometimes the same jury the second time deciding whether they committed the crime and then what the punishment will be. And then there's so many appellate courts. And then in pretty much every state, the governor could even pardon people. And the idea that all of those people are all going to conspire together to virtually unanimously, wrongfully imprison a mother is absurd.
Yeah, it's like any other murder. There's the process, you're innocent until proven guilty. So I think people get this mentality like the Salem witch trials. We're just going to start grabbing women and stringing them up. As soon as you had an abortion. No, it's case by case. Like you said, some might have been forced, which is a small percentage, but there is those, and so it's not like we're just these heartless bills. They're like, oh yeah, you did it, you're done.
Not at all.
You're guilty. You're going to you go.
Right.
So I know you just recently in your state you had HB 892.
896.
896.
Yeah.
Can you give us a briefer on what that bill is? It still an active bill or
it's not?
Okay.
No. So that was a bill in 2017. We had a bill introduced in Texas by State Representative Tony Tinderholt, HB 948, that then died. It did not get a committee hearing, and then Representative Tinderholt reintroduced that in 2019 because we only have our legislature only meets every 2 years in Texas. Thank God. But that's seriously not in vain.
Yeah.
And so he reintroduced it, and it was given the number 896, House Bill 896, and this time we did get a hearing, and people from all across Texas, and some even from beyond Texas came, and I believe over 400 people testified or registered in favor of the bill. Over 300 testified.
How late did you stay up?
And even though each person was only given 60 seconds each, the hearing went until I believe 3 a.m. Wow. And so it was very, very powerful. And I certainly invite anyone who wants to just hear a lot of these arguments from all kind of different people, even many children coming and testifying, and you cannot watch that hearing and not be deeply moved.
Wow.
And but you can, I guess, watch that hearing and not change your mind because the committee chair of that hearing, State Representative Jeff Leach in Texas, ultimately decided, although he is, although he says he's very pro-life, and I believe him to be a Christian. I actually know him personally. Nevertheless, for whatever reasons, he decided that he would not allow the bill to move forward. And his stated reason was because he does not support the idea of the law applying equally to the mother, what we call equal protection. So he opposes that, and he would not allow the bill. He would not allow the committee members of that committee to even vote on the bill. He just unilaterally killed the bill.
Man, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So, would I be correct in stating that SCOTUS does not create law?
So, when we say SCOTUS, it means Supreme Court. Most people don't. I mean, I use SCOTUS, but a lot of people don't use that. The United States Supreme Court. Does it create law? And that's a question that some people ask. And I'm not going to be one that says no, absolutely not, that they don't make law, depending on what you mean by that. Because in America, a lot of our legal system is based upon what? The English common law, right? You probably heard about this. The English common law. Okay, well, a lot of our system, our American system, legal system actually incorporates English common law into our law. And common law, English common law is really judge-made law. It's judges taking universal principles or universal laws and applying them to individual situations. And in a lot of ways, it's biblical. So, in Scripture, you see God saying, you shall not murder. But then you see this what's called case law, where you see examples of it, and this kind of instance is murder, and this, if it happens at night, is murder, and this, if you don't have a railing around your rooftop, that's also homicide. If you do this and it's an accident, it's not. And those are what we would call case law of the unchanging law, or the codified law, the principle, you shall not murder, being applied to individual cases. And then those cases we use those as precedents, right? Just like the Apostle Paul says, you shall not muzzle the ox that treads out the grain. Well, that same principle applies over here to this issue. And so he's using case law to apply to some other issue. So in that sense, judges do make law. Now, it's not statutes. It's not the same. And the law is, if we figure out that the judge-made law is really inconsistent with the true law, then it needs to be changed. But I'm not one to say that the Supreme Court doesn't make law in a sense. I'm not one to say that they absolutely don't. Those who do, I know what they mean, and I agree with them up to the point that they mean it, and that is that they can't amend the Constitution at will, right? Only the people through the states can do that. So they don't make law. They don't make constitutions. They don't make statutes. But they do apply them to individual cases and thereby develop case law.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So in so saying, we like to say, we want to simply ignore Roe versus Wade, and that's kind of the direction I was taking. This is with so what they did is it's iniquitous, it's unbiblical, it's evil, and so we say a lot of times that we simply ignore it and pass our own law in our Union state, abolishing it. And so I kind of presented the question, well, for the pro-life movement and for those who might be listening or involved in the pro-life movement, they always talk about wanting to overturn. Or I'm sorry, they always want to talk about overturning Roe v. Wade, but what's preventing, if that ever even happened, what's preventing the pro-choice people from overturning that overturn?
I point that out too. That if the pro-life movement's entire strategy is elect Republican justices to appoint pro-life, or elect Republican presidents to appoint pro-life justices to overturn Roe, and hey, let's say it happens and we overturn Roe, what's to keep, the next president from replacing one of those justices and putting Roe right back on the books? Exactly. And that's why it's important not just to overturn Roe, but to overturn that very idea that the Supreme Court can trump the Constitution itself. So again, in that sense, kind of getting back to the original thing we talked about, what is law? Well, Blackstone said law is the will of the sovereign. That's what law is. Well, in this country, a lot of us say, well, the sovereign's the Supreme Court. No, that's not who the sovereign is. The sovereign is God.
Yeah, that's who he's referring
and
to.
then God, through the people, the priesthood of believers, then delegates authority, who then delegated up or down, however you want to look at it, to our representatives. And so if the Supreme Court violates the Constitution, then that's where people say the court can't make law. Well, yeah, if they do anything contrary to the Constitution, it's not law.
Right.
It's not law. And so that's where absolutely, it's null and void.
Right.
So could it be that maybe that's where like the conflict and the confusion is that they could probably make case law, but not overall like call a square circle,
Right, exactly.
because I have, with certain constitutional lawyers that I've spoken to, they say that they have to follow a process. Like, in other words, they like the Supreme Court judges would have to look at previous cases of how they were handled.
Right.
Yeah, and there's an attorney verbiage. Like I can't remember what it was. Like status something. To where they were saying, like, in a sense they're enforced to look back at those cases and look at the similarities of it and then base their current case upon previous cases. And I don't know if do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. The layman's term that we would use is just precedent, right? That the court has to look at their previous cases and they have to give a lot of weight to what they decided before. And then that then informs, they have to rule it consistent with that unless there's a higher law that says that's wrong. In this case, it's the Constitution.
Okay, because then they look back. If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong because I'm not really. This is why you're here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But they would look back at the birth control case.
Right.
And they would say, "Oh, that was the right to privacy."
Right.
So, because it's a woman's body, it's her right to privacy to abort the child. So I'm looking back at this case of how this case was handled. We should take, I guess, precedence. I guess to judicially give an opinion that a woman should have a right to abortion because it's her body, like birth control.
And
So I'm assuming the birth control, like the judges the judge to give their opinion on birth control, is that unconstitutional too?
Yes.
Okay.
That case was wrongly decided. So that's Griswold versus Connecticut, decided in the 60s. And that's a lot of the worst cases that you see come out of the Supreme Court. That is one of the cases where it finds its root, right? Where they would kind of diverge from what the Constitution says, was in that case. Because in that case, the court created this right to privacy. Right, go read the Constitution.
like created out of thin air.
Created out of thin air. I mean, you go read the Constitution, and you're not going to see the right to privacy in there.
Yeah.
It doesn't say anything about a right to privacy, and so that's why the court in Griswold, they actually said that, well, it's in the penumbra of the Constitution. Well, what is a penumbra? Well, a penumbra is
A shadow.
A shadow. It's like you've got light, and then the light shines down, and then you've got a shadow underneath whatever the object is. In this case, it would be the Constitution, right? And then the shadow is actually the umbra. The immediate shadow is the umbra, and then you kind of have this hazy shadow around the outside of the main shadow. Well, that's called the penumbra. Okay, so you're saying it's not in the Constitution.
Yeah.
It's not even in the direct shadow of the Constitution. It's in this fuzzy shadow around the Constitution. And Thomas Jefferson, someone once said to him, like, "Oh, you have to read between the lines, to see this." And he said, "I've read between the lines, and all I see is blank space." And same thing here. If the right to privacy, if it's not in the text of the Constitution, then it's not in there.
Yeah.
So they created it literally out of nothing in Griswold, and then they used that in Roe versus Wade, and then they used that again in the Lawrence v. Texas case, which was about homosexual practice. And in Obergefell, which is about homosexual marriage. They keep going back and using that Griswold case and this right to privacy that they created from nothing to then give us all these other things.
So there's really no right to privacy in the Constitution?
Not a general right to privacy that has no definition. Now, there's certainly there certainly are rights to privacy that are discussed in the Constitution. Of course, the Constitution doesn't grant any powers, right? Any rights. Right? Rights don't come from men. Rights come from God. Unalienable rights endowed by our Creator. That's where we get rights. But the Constitution does recognize some rights, and a lot of them do relate to issues of privacy. Under the Fourth Amendment, you have a right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure into your home or your car or on your person. Right? It's a right to privacy in some areas.
Or like information. I hear the right to privacy mainly dealt with information, handing out your personal information.
Yeah, I mean, because you have to conduct searches in order to do that, and you need to have probable cause that there's been a crime committed or about to be committed in order to do that. And if it's not an emergency, you have to get a magistrate to give you a warrant. Right? There's protections that protect privacy rights in specific areas, but there's no general right to privacy that, if that's private, then I guess we can't do anything about it.
So I have the right to privacy to murder my child in my house.
Exactly.
It's my private area.
Exactly. Yep, that's right.
And I think that's where we failed in America as far as the biblical Christianity, but as far as the church, is that we failed to we kind of compartmentalized our Christianity. We kind of pulled into the four walls, and then it kind of like I'll just wait till Jesus comes back and just kind of let the world fall apart, because that's not really our place, the political arena. And so we see the influence of that, because when the righteous men are not ruling, wicked men rule, and then the people mourn. And so I think it was John Adams that said, if for a constitution to work, you have to have a moral and religious people.
Right.
So if you don't have a moral and religious people in your midst ruling, they're going to take the Constitution and twist it and construe it to what they want it to say. And then also they separate, I think the secularists to me want to separate the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, keep them separated, because they know the Declaration of Independence specifically addresses providence, God.
Right.
Whereas Constitution is, lets you know the history of it, it's not specifically God. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they want to separate those, whereas kind of like you have the ones that picture frame, and then the picture frame holds the picture, if that makes sense.
Right.
So I think that's like the huge issue, is that Christians have failed to impact political arena and been involved in this. So when we step back, who's going to fill the void, the vacuum?
Right.
Is the secularist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Constitution does acknowledge the lordship of Christ at the very end of it. It says, "In the year of our Lord."
Okay.
But that's, I wish it said much more than that, but it does say that. It doesn't completely leave God out of it. But why are we on this earth?
Yeah.
Why hasn't God already just raptured us and taken us home? Because He has us here for a purpose. And it's not our enjoyment, because we would be having a lot more enjoyment if we were already in heaven, right? It's because He has a mission for us here. And our mission, He told us what it was in Matthew 28. Go into all the world, make disciples, teaching them to, baptizing them, teaching them to obey whatsoever I've commanded. So that is our mission here on earth. And so we're not just here to hanging on for the rapture. That's not why He sent us here. We have a mission that we should be pursuing, or else we're being disobedient to Him. And in the last day when He comes, He says to those, who say, "Lord, Lord," but they practice iniquity, He says, "Depart from me, I never knew you." And I don't want to be one of those. No. I want to be obeying Him and making disciples and teaching other people to obey Him.
Well, Bradley, that is theocracy. How dare you practice that?
I mean, God is the King and the Judge of all the earth. He's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, I think people get confused with the theocracy versus they think more of a.
They think Roman Catholicism.
Well,
they think ecclesiocracy, right?
Where the church runs the state.
Exactly, and that's kind of getting back to my original point. Christ has all authority. He delegates to whomsoever He pleases. He delegates some authority to civil government, some to the church, some to the family, and leaves the rest liberty as an individual. And so it's up to each one of those spheres of authority to operate within their sphere and not go beyond it. So the church should not be wielding the sword in the civil arena. I would oppose a theocracy, or I'm sorry, like an ecclesiocracy, like in Iran or something like that. That would be contrary to the order that God's created.
To his order.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm glad that there's a difference. Like, you know, like we as the church, we have a role and the state has their own role. So that, you know, that should help us, because I think that we mix, it's like we want to mix those two together. You know, it's like the minute I start saying like, well, the parents should be criminalized for the death of the baby, it's like, do you not want to see them saved? I was like, that's totally different. That's like, I think you're in a different category here, you know?
Well, and you know, you mentioned earlier that the council person you were talking to, that as soon as you said that you supported capital punishment or the death penalty, that they just completely shut off, and that was the end of the debate. I mean, biblically as Christians, we absolutely should support capital punishment in appropriate cases and with appropriate procedures that apply. And a lot of cases today are not really following the appropriate procedures in death penalty cases. That's another discussion for another day. But absolutely, God supports the death penalty. In Genesis 9, whoever sheds man's blood, what's the remedy? By man shall his blood be shed. That's when God instituted civil government, right? And people say, well, that's the Old Testament. Well, let's go to Romans 13. It says the state bears what? The sword. That's the sword is not an instrument of chastening. It doesn't say rod. It doesn't say prison. It says sword. Well, there's only one thing that you can really do with a sword, and that's to execute the death penalty. And so the state, as we see in the Old Testament and repeated again in the New, is there to is to be, as it says in Romans 12, God's avenger upon the evildoer, and in appropriate cases, bearing even the sword.
And on that case, it does state also in Romans, I believe, chapter 2, that we are to establish the law, that Christ didn't come to abolish it, rather to establish.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, because even Paul refers to when he's before, I think, Felix or whatever, he said, if I've done anything illegal, anything criminal, I'm worthy of death, then yes, bring it on. I deserve the death, basically death ability. I mean, that's what he was saying. I deserve whatever thing criminally I've done. If it's worthy of death, then I deserve death. So he's not saying, hold on now, that was the Old Testament, guys. We don't kill people for crimes.
We just love on them.
But
we just want to give them cupcakes.
And you see, Jesus, a lot of people bring up the woman caught in adultery, and that's a longer discussion. But there, I think the issue is not, Jesus isn't saying, whoa, don't exercise the death penalty. It's that you could either say that wasn't an appropriate case for it, or more probably, they had violated so many of his other laws to even get to that point, and all the procedural laws that he has that surround the issue of the death penalty, they had violated. And so that's why it certainly wasn't appropriate there.
Wow. All right, Mr. Pierce, I feel like we can be here forever, but you have a family and you have a conference to be at. So we thank you so much for being a part of this. Like, honestly, it was such a blessing really to have you here. And tell us one more time, like, how do people get to know about what you're doing?
Yes.
And where to direct them where?
Yeah, so you can go to our Facebook page on Abolish Abortion Texas on Facebook. You can go to our website, abolishAbortionTexas.org. Or if you want to learn more, great ways to watch some of the presentations we've done, which you can do on our YouTube channel, AATX, which is just Abolish Abortion Texas on YouTube. We've got a bunch of videos on there.
I met your video guy. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And I would say, please, if you have any, because we kind of ran out of time and have time to cover it, but if you have any misunderstandings or confusion on how we got Roe versus Wade, and you think, oh, it's the Democrats that lost it. It wasn't. Bradley has great videos discussing the history of that in great detail and good pictures and everything, and it's very informative. So please look him up, like you said, on YouTube and watch those videos. And I think you even discuss They're gonna watch one on like the inconsistencies of the homicide law versus, say a woman goes into abortion clinic, she has her child murdered, and then she comes out of the abortion clinic, she shoots maybe a woman that her boyfriend's cheating on her with, and she was pregnant, so then she'll be held liable for a double homicide.
Right.
So about 38 states have fetal homicide laws
Right.
for preborn.
Yep.
And so the inconsistencies of the law, that she can murder her own child, but she can't murder, somebody else's child.
Right. Right.
So you discuss that very clearly, and so I just encourage you who are listening and watching, please go and check those videos out.
It's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
But he's limited.
Right.
Thank you, y'all. You want to close us
you.
up just saying
Yeah.
this has been Florida Watchman and
In Oklahoma for the support of SB 13. So please show your support, spread the news far and wide, Facebook, social media, Twitter, whatever it is. We're here to get this bill of abolition to completely abolish abortion completely and criminalize it here in the state of Oklahoma. So pray, you Christians, and support, spread, and encourage others to do the same. Thank you.
thank y'all. Good night.
You can call me stupid. Listen, you can call me sheep.